A lot of companies are really excited to use AI for marketing right now, but the smartest companies aren't just using AI to get new customers, they're using AI to retain the customers that they already have. In this video, I'll explain how you can use predictive AI, segmentation, generative AI, and AI agents to predict customer churn risk, understand customer needs, and take the right retention actions at the right time. First, let's just talk about why customer retention is so important. In an article at the Harvard Business Review, I read that acquiring new customers is 5 to 10 times more expensive than retaining existing ones. So it's actually much cheaper to just try and retain a customer than to go out and get a new one. Furthermore, retention has a lot to do with a metric called customer lifetime value, essentially, how much money a customer generates for the business over the lifetime of their relationship with that business. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into the weeds here, but the relationship between customer lifetime value and customer acquisition cost, the price that you pay to acquire that customer, is actually really important. Because the more valuable a customer is to the business, the more money they generate, which enables future acquisition of new customers. Essentially, a way of thinking about this is the more money a customer will generate for the business, the more money you can spend to acquire that customer. So, having a high LTV is really important, and having high customer retention increases LTV, customer lifetime value. So, it's really important to retain customers as long as possible and have them purchase from you over and over and over again. With all of that in mind, let's talk about the first way you can use AI to reduce churn and increase retention, and that's with predictive AI. One of the most common ways that we can fix churn and increase customer retention is by building predictive models. Essentially, we're using a type of AI, predictive AI. Traditionally, we call this supervised learning. We can build a predictive AI system that can predict whether or not a customer is likely to churn. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but you can collect data about customer behavior, things like when they're logging in, how long they're staying on the site, their purchase history, their support history, the number of support tickets, how frequently they're contacting support, things like that. You can take that information and build it into a machine learning model. Machine learning is a type of AI such that you put that data into the model as an input, and it will output either a churn prediction, whether the person is going to churn or not churn, or a probability of doing that. If you think about it, this is very helpful because if you can predict whether or not a person is likely to churn, then you can build retention strategies and go talk to those people. Have a customer experience person proactively reach out to those individuals that are likely to churn. You can send them special offers, things like that. Additionally, depending on exactly how you build these models, you can use these predictive systems for inferential purposes. So, what I mean is, you can not only look at the output, whether or not a person is likely to churn, but you can also use these models to figure out what the drivers are of that churn behavior. So, if you see that they have a lot of support tickets, maybe you're going to go and analyze their support history to figure out what exactly is going wrong. Are there any topics that are coming up over and over again? Is it maybe high wait times? So you can actually use these predictive models to analyze this churn behavior and figure out what's going wrong that's driving the churn probability. So ultimately, if you do this right, you can figure out the parts of your business that are maybe causing the customer to be frustrated and want to leave, but you can also proactively predict that behavior and build retention systems to try and keep those customers. Next, let's talk about kind of an overlooked lever for customer retention, and that's AI driven segmentation. Now, segmentation is traditionally used for marketing strategy and product strategy, generally for go to market. Having said that, if you really think about it, it's part of the foundation as well of good customer retention. Why? Well, first, let me explain briefly what segmentation is. In segmentation, we take a very large customer group and then we find subgroups. Some of those subgroups, they might have higher income, they might have a higher service level that they're paying for, and they might prefer certain types of communication channels. You might have a different segment that maybe has less money, they're on a lower service level, and they might prefer text or a different channel as their primary channel of communication. Different segments have different values and needs. They have different features that they like in the product. They have different messages that might resonate with them. So if you're treating every customer the same because you're not doing customer segmentation, your messages can get a little bit muddled. You can get your product features a little bit wrong. Your communication and channel strategy might be a little bit off. But with good segmentation, you can target your customers a little bit better. You're going to build one set of product and marketing and messaging strategies for one customer segment and a different set of product and marketing and messaging strategies for different segments. If you do this right, you're going to have an overall better marketing strategy, better product strategy, higher levels of engagement, higher levels of satisfaction, and ultimately higher retention. So ultimately, segmentation doesn't just help you sell, it helps you retain your customers. Next, let's talk about how you can use AI for customer insights. Almost all marketing strategy, including customer retention strategies, starts with understanding your customers. So you need to understand what are their values, what are their needs, what do they want out of the product. Once they're a customer, you need to understand what their frustrations are. And to do this, you need to analyze your customers and your customer data. Now, traditionally, there are some analytics techniques. I started doing this 20 years ago, about 2005, doing this for large banks. Later on, I worked at a company, a very famous advertising and marketing company called Ogilvy. You might have heard of the rather famous David Ogilvy. I worked at that company. And later on, I worked at Apple. And in many of these roles, I was analyzing customer data to help these companies to understand what their customers' needs, values, frustrations, and perceptions were. Now, you can use some traditional data analytics techniques, and I would actually recommend doing that. There are a variety of ways that you can analyze traditional data that you might have in a database or a spreadsheet, survey data. I did a lot of that survey analysis, for example, when I was at Apple. But now there are modern techniques that you can use as well that can help you gain customer insights. So, for example, you can use various AI models to do sentiment analysis. We're frequently not, by the way, going to use a large language model. We're typically going to use something from maybe the BERT family of models or a different type of masked language model. You don't need to really understand what that means, but I want you to kind of be familiar with the terms. And I want you to understand that we're typically going to do this with something besides a large language model. You can also use various types of AI systems to do text analysis. So, with sentiment analysis, we're typically trying to figure out what their sentiments are. Are they frustrated, happy, sad, joyful? And with text analysis, you can start to surface some of the topics and core concerns that they have with the product, with the marketing, with the messaging, with their service experiences, and so on. Now, in order to do this, you often need to have text data. You can get that from emails, surveys, support tickets, chat interactions, a variety of different sources. I don't want to go too far into those details, but I do want you to understand the sorts of data that you'll need to do this. Ultimately, though, if you do this right, sentiment analysis and text analytics can help you get clear feedback from your customers and understand the sorts of problems that they're having that are causing them to churn out. And like I said, once you understand the causes of churn, you can start building new strategies to retain those customers. Next, let's talk about how you can use generative AI like large language models. Now, I'm sure you've been kind of asking yourself, how do we use large language models, things like Claude or ChatGPT? You might have noticed that so far in the video, I've talked about other things like predictive AI and sentiment analysis and segmentation. That's because your AI marketing strategy is going to use a range of tools, not just large language models, but things like the other types of AI that I already talked about. But you can use generative AI for customer retention. One way is just asking questions. You can use generative AI like large language models as sort of an advisor. I will say, though, that I would discourage doing that because large language models do sometimes get things a little bit wrong. A really good marketing expert or a good AI expert is going to help you vastly more than just asking questions to a large language model. Having said that, if you've used other types of AI, you've built a predictive system, you've done some segmentation, maybe you've done some sentiment analysis or text analytics, you can then feed some of that information into a large language model And an LLM might be able to generate new ideas, new retention ideas. You can use it for brainstorming. You can also use it to generate things like messaging, better sales copy, marketing copy, and all of the other types of AI then become inputs to the context. And that context engineering then helps the large language model generate better outputs. So you can use LLMs for your retention strategies, but they're often going to work best as part of an ecosystem of other types of AI. And that brings us to our last way you can use AI for customer retention, and that's AI agents. AI agents are sort of an extension in this case of the large language model strategies that I just talked about. With an AI agent, you're going to be pulling information from a lot of the other sources that we already talked about. You'll pull information from your predictive models, from your segmentation schemes, from your text analytics and sentiment analyses. You'll pull information from your databases and also leverage expertise from your human experts in your business. AI agents will be able to take that information and then start reasoning with that information, but also taking action. So you can take some of the customer retention strategies and processes that you might have built and executed with a human being, and you can start automating some of that work with an AI agent. So you can have an AI agent ingest all of that information and then maybe send custom messages, custom offers, contact a human being in your business so they can engage a customer, sort of human in the loop. You can have an AI agent ingest some of this information, reason with it, and then trigger a specialized email retention sequence in your email service provider. If you do this right, an AI agent can become a operational tool that integrates all of the other types of AI and human beings and many of your other sources of information in your business to process information and execute on that information in real time to help retain your customers. If you do all of this right and you use the right AI techniques to help you retain your customers, you're going to have obviously higher customer retention, but downstream of that, you're going to have higher revenue growth, higher customer lifetime value. As I said earlier, that essentially gives you more money to do customer acquisition, and you'll have an easier time growing your business while maintaining profitability. Having said that, retention is really only one part of the puzzle. If you want a broader view of how AI can drive acquisition, growth, personalization, and profitability, check out my full video on AI for marketing. Check it out here.